Welcome to the LumiCast, your premier gateway to the universe of limitless photo editing. Dive into the galaxy of Luminar software and the dynamic world of AI photo editing. Join us weekly for a burst of creativity and the drive to transform your photos with confidence and skill. Broadcasting directly from Clever Photographer headquarters, it's time to welcome your hosts, Jakub Bors and Holly Linton.
Hello, everyone. We are back with another episode of LumiCast, your favorite podcast focusing on photography, photo editing, and of course, our beloved Luminar Neo. My name is Jakub Bors. I am coming through your sound system from United Kingdom, and next to me virtually is an incredible photographer, Holly Linton. Hello, Holly.
Hey, Jakub. How's it going? I didn't know I was an incredible photographer.
Of course you are. I love your photos. Holly, what are we going to be doing today?
Today is a great topic that I love to talk about. It's getting creative with in-camera multiple exposures and the use of creative filters to get special effects in your images.
Wow, that sounds great. Now, I have never tried this in camera. I have done lots of different adjustments or creative enhancements in post-processing or during the photo editing. So I'm really curious to hear from you on what can be done in camera. So today, for change, I will be the one asking the questions and Holly will guide us through this. Are you ready, Holly?
Yes, I am prepared.
Excellent. So the first question, the building starting one, what is multiple exposure photography?
Okay, it's just as the name implies, you're going to be taking two or more images to create one final exposure. So if you think of it in terms of using layers in Luminar Neo, for example, you're putting one thing over another thing and blending them together to create one final image.
Right. So I guess people have maybe seen this before because you can kind of see it around, but maybe they didn't know it's called that way, and maybe they didn't know that it can be actually made in camera. So talking about the cameras, do all cameras support this feature?
Well, the answer is no, because Jakub uses a Sony, and that would be why I'm teaching this class right now.
Absolutely.
Sony, for whatever reason, does not offer it. So I know that Canon, which I'm a Canon user, Nikon and Fuji might offer it depending on the age of your camera. And I believe Olympus has it, but they only offer a minimum amount of exposures, 2 exposures. So basically, you just have to check your camera manual, look in your camera settings to see if you even have it. So the purpose of today really is to make you aware that multiple exposure does exist in a lot of cameras. So if you've never heard of this before, definitely check out your camera and see if you have this capability.
Great.
Now, if your camera doesn't have it, so Jakub, we know, is the master of, overlays and creations. Your photo manipulation masterclass kind of reminds me of what a typical multiple exposure might look like. Like you had a camera with a person walking in it, inside of it, that type of idea. But if you don't have this in your camera, if you're using Snapseed on your mobile phone, which we've talked about in other episodes, that's a free app for editing mobile phone pictures. They have a multiple exposure feature in there, so you could always play around with that. All right?
Great.
So,
well done. Yeah. So not all is lost, even when you're a Sony user.
And not all is lost because technically you could do it in your software with whether with Luminar or Photoshop or whatever software has layers. You're technically putting just one image over another. So, yeah, not all is lost, but today's really the exciting part of doing it in camera.
Right. Okay, so now we know what the multiple exposure is. We also know how it works with the camera or post-processing, but why would somebody do that? Why would you go and try this?
Because you can. Because it's creative, it's fun, it's a way of being artistic. You can cut down on editing time because you're pretty much making this interesting creation all in your camera. It offers a way of creating textures and overlays. You can make things abstract. You can blend colors together because not everything has to be in focus. You can kind of, unfocus your camera and just make all sorts of things out of it. and you can use it to tell a story. So for example, say you're at like a wedding. You can do, if your camera allows for several exposures, you could take a picture of the bride and groom. Then you could take a picture of the cake. Then you could take a picture of the church and kind of blend it all together and make a little story out of it.
That sounds great. Sounds great. Brilliant. Okay. Well, you could be a salesman. You just sold us the whole technique and the whole effect. Okay. So now we know that. We are excited. We want to do it. So the question is straightforward. How do you actually do it? How do you do the multiple exposure?
Okay. So obviously, if you know you have your this menu in your camera, you're going to go to that menu. I'm speaking on behalf of Canon today. This is how I do it, but it's probably very similar in every camera. So you're going to find where multiple exposures is and enable it, because it's going to be disabled from the start. Then it's going to ask you, set your multi-exposure controls. And in my camera, there's 4 of them. Now, you think of this like the blending modes in Luminar Neo. They have additive, average, bright, or dark. So you know how some of those blending modes are included in our software. Definitely. So I typically leave it on average, but depending on what you're shooting, you can play around with all the different ones and see which one works for you. Additive kind of makes everything a little bit brighter as you keep taking the pictures. The bright one will impact all the brightest pixels. So anything that's dark won't show up in the multiple exposure. And then dark, everything that's dark will show up. So any bright parts will kind of disappear. So you just got to play around with it. Then you're going to decide how many exposures do you want to do. My camera goes up to 9.
Wow.
So you set that number, whatever you like. Some people will say, odds are better than evens if you're doing multiple exposures. So you just play around with that. Then you're going to have a choice of, do you want to save the result or do you want to save all of the images? That's what my camera offers. And I like saving all of them because in mine, so I'm shooting RAW always. So I'm taking RAW pictures, but the final result gets turned into a JPEG. So when you're looking through the pictures, say you don't like the way the multiple exposure turned out, but you might love one of the images from the multiple exposure, you have that raw file that you can still work with. So I like saving all of them, but some people might just save just the final result. But I like having that option. I did not have that option in my DSLR, but in the mirrorless, I have that option. So I save all of them.
Brilliant.
And then finally, you have the option of choosing whether or not you just want to use multiple exposure just this once, or if you want to put it on continuous. So if you plan to just do, this is how you want to shoot for the next hour, put it on continuous so that it stays in that mode. So those are the literal settings that you'll have to choose from before you begin your shooting.
Excellent. Okay. So I have a quick question here. Obviously not obviously, but generally when we do multiple exposure in post-processing, we generally just use 2 images actually, but then you have the time and possibility to choose, so you will find one which is really contrasty and one bright, and then I kind of put them together. So I have 2 questions. One of them is, do you kind of take the pictures one after each other, like in the same location? Or do you maybe like take one and then you walk for another half an hour and take another one? Like how long is the process basically? That's my question.
Well, these are good questions because that's going to come up in one of our next segments.
Okay, so that's great. And the second one then is, do you get to preview the result on the back of your camera?
That's in the next section too.
Great. Okay. Well, in that case, we move straight to the next one, where obviously we're going to be looking at how to actually shoot it.
Yes. Okay. So you're going to take your first picture. Then you're literally going to just look around and say, what might I put with this picture? And so you're looking through, to answer your question from a moment ago, in my camera, you will visually see what it looks like as it's overlaying.
Wow.
It's really cool. Now, I believe this is just because I'm on a mirrorless camera. I don't recall that my DSLR had this feature. So in my case, I can literally see what's overlaying over the other. And it's really cool. So that's like that part of the fun. Is like, wow, that looks interesting. You can do you could do a variety of things. Some people will like say you're doing 5 exposures. You take a picture of a flower and you put your first image in the center of your frame composition. Then you can like turn for the next exposure, turn your camera and put it you'll see the flower go above the main flower. And then you can turn it another way so that you're putting like a circle of flowers around the main flower. So that you can see all this happening in your camera.
Wow.
If you had a telephoto lens, you can zoom in or zoom out on your remaining exposures. So you can take a picture of a flower and then maybe zoom in, and then the flower looks gigantic next to the other flower.
Wow.
Or if you're on a prime lens, you just move your feet and get closer or farther away and just see what's happening, when you do things like that. Okay. Now, another question you asked previously. You can take an image that's already on your memory card from earlier in the shoot, or maybe you're not a person who reformats your card every shoot. So you have a subject in mind, like, oh, this picture would look great with something I'm looking at in front of me right now. You can find that in your camera and pick that as the source image, and then continue your multiple exposures from that base image.
Wow.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Now, answer another question you had. If you wait too long, then the feature will disable, at least on my camera. Maybe about 10 minutes or so is what I've discovered, because I have done exactly what you just said. I'll be like, take one picture, then be like, and I'll look through the camera and say, no, that doesn't look good. That doesn't look good. And let me wander around and see what else I can find. And then I go to do it and it's already turned off. So I got to start over. And then in some cases, you might have to use exposure compensation or dial down the exposure. Even though, say, I'm using that average setting that I told you about, it might be better to like keep it in manual mode so that you can dial down your exposure on your, other pictures so that it looks better. Because you can tell if it's too bright when you're looking through your viewfinder. So that's some tips for how to shoot it.
Brilliant. Okay, so we know kind of how to do it in camera. We know how to shoot with it. And I think before we look at the different ideas on what to shoot and maybe talk about some fun filters, we just take a quick break, look at one of my favorite ads or listen to it, and then we'll be back with more talk on the subject of multiple exposures.
If you're listening to the LumiCast podcast, then we share something in common. We love editing photos, and we love Luminar. It's almost breathtaking what this amazing tech can do for you. On our website, you'll find countless different things to help you be more creative than you ever thought imaginable. From our photo manipulation masterclass to our power bundle with 986 elements, our essential preset bundle, editing software and extensions to our tutorials. Harness the power at the website at www.cleverphotographer.com/Luminar. Again, that's cleverphotographer.com/Luminar. Now, back to LumiCast.
And we are back with more fun on multiple exposure photography. Now we have gone through all the technical parts. We now understand completely what the technique is. And it's definitely time to look at some ideas for the subject. So, Holly, you as an expert, come on, give us some ideas on what we can photograph this way.
Okay. If you're totally clueless, the first starting point would be just do a Google search or look on Pinterest for multiple exposure images just to get some ideas. You might see lots of silhouettes of people's heads or faces, and then you could put another subject into that. Like you might see a giant silhouette of a head, and then like wrapped around it, you'll see clouds.
Okay.
Or not that you'd have a picture of like a brain to put into it, but maybe leaves or trees, like things coming out of people's heads, basically.
Right. Wow.
If you have pre-visualized ideas, that's always great, like the things you might see on Pinterest. But there's certainly no harm in experimenting and just taking random shots. In fact, one reason I love multiple exposure is it's something I'll do at the end of a shoot. Like if I go to flower gardens and it's closing at 6:00, my last hour of shooting is usually when I'll do multiple exposures. And it's almost like getting your bang for your buck and like, what could I do real quick to just try to get something more creative? So there's no harm in just kind of randomly taking pictures of things to see what subjects might work well with one another. but you could blend complex subjects with plain subjects. So maybe take a picture of a landscape, but then shoot maybe an unfocused part of the grass. Therefore, you're putting like a green overlay. So you can use it for color correcting or color overlays, basically. I took a picture of just like some little weeds that looked like cute little flowers the other day. And then I took an unfocused picture of the grass and it just put like a nice color over it. So you can think of using it that way. And then I think I already kind of said this. If you focus on a subject, so I always use flowers as a good example, then you can defocus the exact picture on the next one. And it almost just gives it like a nice painterly look. So it's a way of doing kind of painterly exposures. You can do like repeating patterns. So say you have a ballerina or, you know, a person doing some kind of activity.
Right.
Pretend you did 9 exposures of a ballerina. You took her picture doing like a pirouette. And then the next exposure, you just move your camera just a tiny bit to the right. You could see the exposure happening. So then you have like a row of ballerinas. And it works with obviously any genre of photography. So I'm picturing you at your castles, you know, taking a picture of like you were at a tulip field recently, take a picture of the castle and the tulips and just have like tulips covering the castle. You know, so just like using or one of your lanterns, you love lanterns, take a picture of a lantern and then see what you could, you know, put over it. Just using your imagination. It just lends yourself to using your imagination.
Right.
And you never know what you're going to get. And it's all going to be unique. No one will ever have the same picture ever again.
That's brilliant. All right. So let's say I'm just starting. This is like the first time or I want to give it a go in camera. Would you say that it's better to maybe start with less images for the multiple exposure?
Yes, I would say start with 2 till you understand what's happening. And then play around with the different, you know, additive versus dark versus light and see just so you get the gist for what's really taking place. And
would you think that maybe just like you say, blending complex subject with plain subject is easier? Or what do you think is like kind of easiest way to start?
Probably the easiest way to start is just take a multiple exposure of the same exact subject.
Okay. All right.
So
and just see what it does.
Just see what it's doing. Yep.
Great. And then my last question was, obviously you see the preview on the back of your camera, or you should, depending on the camera. Does the result sometimes look differently on your screen later? Like, is it just like with any other photos that sometimes you think, wow, I have something really cool. And then when you bring it home, maybe it's not exactly what you were expecting, or is it quite similar?
I think it's quite similar. When it comes to editing it though, since mine blends it as a JPEG, obviously you can't use the RAW, develop RAW for it. But I find one of the tools that I'm using frequently is dehazing. Okay. Because of the multiple exposure. And maybe it's just because I'm using the average mode on it. It always tends to need some kind of dehazing. You know how you show us on the gray histogram, you know, pulling the whites and blacks in? I always have to do that for a multiple exposure. So there must be something happening in that process that kind of detracts from the blacks and whites. So you just have to hit that J key and make sure everything looks good, exposed properly.
The good thing is that as it is very creative technique, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? It's not your fine art, let's say landscape or portrait where everything has to be super sharp and super realistic. I think you can be really playful with it. So little mistakes can actually add to the entire creativity, I think so. That is really, really cool. But to say that, the multiple exposure is obviously part of very creative photography. And if we thought that it would be a good idea to mention some cool filters. And if we're talking about filters and we have Holly with us, we have to start with Lensbaby system. So Holly, what do you have for us?
Yes. So filters are just another great way to be creative. And if you're in a rut with your regular traditional photography, it's just always fun. Throw on a filter and see what can happen. We talked about Lensbaby's Omni Wand system, which is their filter system. And you do not need a Lensbaby lens to use these. You use one of your own existing lenses. It's a filter that screws on to your existing lens. And then it has magnets on it. And it has these different wands that are made of glass that have all different shapes, colors. There's different films. You can make rainbow flares and all sorts of creative stuff with the Lensbaby Omni Wand system.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then I have a lot of special effects filters like kaleidoscopes, a halo filter, and you can get, if there's a brand called Prism Lens FX, it's a little bit expensive, but I have their halo filter. They have linear filters, ghosting filters, chromatic flares, crystals, and you can find starburst filters, kind of like different tools that we have in Luminar. We can create like with magic light, but you could do it with a filter instead.
So in camera then.
Yeah, there's a brand called K&F Concepts, which has a lot of the same type of filters as Prism Lens FX, but they're a lot cheaper. So, of course, I like going with those. So you can start with a less expensive brand and see if you even like what's happening. So they have a ghosting and starburst filter. But basically, if you look on Amazon, there's a lot of different, like, lower quality brands out there, but it doesn't mean that they're not good. But just for $30, try one and see if you like it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I just think that's another great way of being creative. And like my halo filter puts like a big swirl around your subject. And it just looks really fun. It's eye-catching.
Absolutely. That was superb. And I think maybe in the future we need to do a little episode going through all these different filters. That would be lots of fun to go a little deeper, maybe do recommendation on a brand and just have a fun with it even further. But this was amazing, Holly. Thank you so much for helping us to get ready for the photography season with another creative way of capturing everything that is happening around us. Because where I am from right now here in UK, the weather is absolutely stunning. Definitely time to prepare your camera, charge your batteries, format your memory card. It's coming. It's coming. Folks, anyway, thank you very much. Holly, thank you again. It was
My pleasure.
Great. Thank you. And we will talk to you again in 7 days on Friday. So speak to you then. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
And that's a wrap. Now, there's only 3 things left to do. Subscribe to this podcast so you never miss a future episode. Visit our website at cleverphotographer.com/LumiCast to see what we have in store next. And stay creative and keep editing your photos no matter what anyone says.